Boss laughed at Black Apprentice for being young, until he fixed all the cars himself. Martha Miller never imagined that her routine at the auto repair shop would be shaken up by a boy of just 12 years old, holding a yellow toolbox worn by time. The boy appeared at the door of Miller's Auto Care in the Hope Valley neighborhood of New York City on a Monday morning when 5 cars were already waiting in line for repairs. "I can help you, ma'am," said the boy, adjusting the faded red vest he wore over his white t-shirt. "I know how to fix engines." Martha dropped the wrench she was holding and turned to the boy with her eyes wide with indignation. Her bleached blonde hair fluttered with the abrupt movement of her head. "What did you say, kid?" "I can help with the cars, ma'am. I learned from my grandpa." The laugh that came from Martha's throat echoed throughout the shop, making the 3 mechanics working under the hood of a blue Chevy Sonic look up embarrassed. Joe, the oldest of them, knew that tone of voice from the boss. Whenever she laughed like that, someone would get hurt from the conversation. "Boy, how old are you?" 12, ma'am." 12 years old. Martha guffawed again, putting her hands on her hips. "And you want to work in a repair shop? A child has no place here among real men working." The boy kept his posture straight, holding the yellow toolbox firmly. His dark eyes showed no fear, only a determination that bothered Martha more than she cared to admit. "My name is David, ma'am. David Miller Sullivan. My grandfather was Samuel, who worked here for 20 years. The name made Joe stop completely what he was doing. Oscar and Charlie, the other 2 mechanics, exchanged meaningful looks. Everyone in the neighborhood knew Mr. Samuel, the most respected mechanic in the area, until his passing the previous year. Martha felt a tightness in her chest upon hearing the name. Samuel Miller had been hired by the shop's former owner, and when she bought the business 3 years ago, she had to live with the shadow of the old mechanic's reputation. Customers always compared the current work to the time when Mr. Samuel was in technical command. "Your grandfather," she began, but stopped herself, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter who your grandfather was, boy. You are too small, too weak, and too young for this job. Go play in the street." "But I know how to fix things, Mrs. Martha. Grandpa taught me since I was little." "Enough!" she yelled, pointing her finger at the boy. "Get out of here now before I call someone to throw you out. And don't come back, you hear me?" David lowered his head but didn't leave immediately. He observed the cars in the shop with a careful look, as if he were mentally diagnosing each problem. Then he walked slowly to the door, carrying his toolbox. "The blue Chevy Sonic over there has a fuel pump problem," he said softly, almost whispering. "And the white Ford Fiesta has a worn timing belt." Joe's eyes widened. He had been trying for 2 hours to figure out why the Chevy Sonic wouldn't start properly, and had considered exactly a fuel pump problem. As for the white Ford Fiesta, he hadn't even started examining it, but the unusual engine noise could indeed indicate a belt problem. "Get out of here now," Martha shouted, and David finally walked out the door. The silence that followed was heavy. Joe went back to work on the Chevy Sonic, but his mind was troubled. Charlie and Oscar also seemed uncomfortable. "Boss," Joe ventured, "the boy might be right about the fuel pump. I was thinking the same thing." "Joe, are you going to listen to a 12-year-old kid?" Martha retorted, but her voice had lost some of its conviction. "It's just that Mr. Samuel really was good. If he taught his grandson us, Samuel is dead." She cut in sharply. "And I'm not hiring a child in this shop, period." Martha went back to her small office at the rear of the shop, slamming the door hard. Alone, she sank heavily into the old swivel chair and ran her hands over her face. The mention of Samuel's name always irritated her, because it reminded her of the constant comments from customers about how things were better before. When she bought the shop from the previous owner, Mrs. Eleanor, who was retiring, Martha had big plans. She wanted to modernize the business, attract new customers, expand the services. But she quickly discovered that Samuel's reputation was bigger than the shop's itself. Customers would come in asking for the old mechanic, and when they found out he had left, many were visibly disappointed. Martha had grown up in a family of mechanics. Her father, her uncle, her 2 brothers, all worked with cars. But she was always underestimated for being a woman. She had to fight twice as hard to be respected in the field. Now, at 42, she finally had her own shop, but she felt she was constantly proving her worth. The presence of that boy bothered her because it brought back all the insecurities she tried to bury. If Samuel's grandson really knew mechanics, would that mean she was being outdone by a child? The idea was unacceptable. Outside, David didn't leave. He sat on the sidewalk in front of the shop, placed the yellow toolbox beside him, and watched the activity. Cars coming in, going out, mechanics working. He knew every sound, every symptom, every common problem the vehicles presented. Samuel Miller hadn't just been his grandfather, he had been his foster father. After David's parents died in an accident when he was 5, the old mechanic took on the responsibility of caring for his grandson. And that's how David grew up, literally inside shops, first as his grandfather's helper on outside jobs, then observing and learning every technique, every trick, every secret of the trade. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. Samuel always said that mechanics wasn't just technique, it was intuition. It was listening to the engine noise and understanding what it was trying to say. It was feeling the vibration and knowing where the problem was. It was looking at a part and recognizing if it was at its limit or if it could last a few more months. David, my grandson, the old man used to say, a car is like a person. When it's sick, it complains, makes noise, calls for attention. You just need to know how to listen. And David learned to listen. By 7, he could already identify the sound of a misfiring engine. By 9, he knew how to change oil and filters by himself. By 11, just before Samuel passed, he could already diagnose complex problems in the electrical system. But nobody took a 12-year-old boy talking about mechanics seriously, especially a woman like Martha, who clearly had her own demons to face. David stayed on the sidewalk for 3 hours, watching. He saw when Joe finally confirmed that the blue Chevy Sonic really had a fuel pump problem. He saw when they started examining the white Ford Fiesta and discovered the timing belt was indeed worn out. The 2 diagnoses he had made in less than 5 minutes of observation. Around 2 in the afternoon, a silver Civic arrived, making a lot of noise and spewing white smoke from the exhaust. The owner, a middle-aged man wearing a dress shirt, looked desperate. "Please, I need my car fixed today," he begged Martha. "I have an important meeting tomorrow morning in Jersey City." David immediately recognized the problem. Blown head gasket. The white smoke was water mixed with oil entering the combustion. A relatively simple fix, but one that required experience to avoid complicating. Martha called Charlie to examine the Civic. The young man, who was about 25, looked at the engine, tested a few things, but was uncertain. "Could be a few things, boss. I need time to investigate." "How much time?" "About 4 or 5 hours." The customer made a face. 5 hours? But isn't the problem obvious? This white smoke— "Cars are complicated things, sir," Martha interjected. "You can't diagnose it just like that." David got up from the sidewalk and discreetly approached the Civic. The sound of the rough-running engine, the specific color of the smoke, the slightly sweet smell coming from the exhaust— everything pointed exactly to what he thought. "Head gasket," he murmured to himself. Unfortunately, Martha heard. "What did you say?" All eyes turned to David. The customer, the 3 mechanics, the boss. He swallowed hard. "Head gasket, ma'am. The problem is the head gasket." Charlie laughed. "Kid, you didn't even get near the engine. How could you know?" "The white smoke indicates water mixed with oil. The rough engine noise, the kind of sweet smell from the exhaust. It all points to the head gasket." The customer looked interested. "And is that serious?" "No, sir. It's a relatively simple repair. About 2 hours of work for someone with experience." Martha felt the blood rush to her head. "Enough," she exploded. "Didn't I already tell you not to come back here?" "But boss," the customer interjected, "if the boy is right, he's a child. He's 12. What can a child know about car engines?" "Excuse me," said a voice behind everyone. It was Joe who had approached during the argument. The veteran mechanic had a thoughtful expression. "Boss, can I take a look at the Civic?" "Of course, Joe. You at least are a real professional." Joe bent down and examined the Civic's engine. checked the water level in the radiator, observed the color of the smoke, smelled the exhaust, tested the consistency of the engine oil. 5 minutes later, he stood up. The boy is right. It's the head gasket. The silence was awkward. Martha felt her face burn with shame and anger. How had a 12-year-old kid diagnosed in seconds something Charlie couldn't identify? Beginner's luck, she grumbled. "Joe, can you do the repair today?" asked the customer. "Yes, sir, I can. 2 hours, 2.5 at most." "Perfect. I'll leave the car here and come back late afternoon." After the customer left, Martha turned to David with eyes blazing with anger. "Listen here, kid. I don't know what game you're playing, but it's not going to work. This is my shop, I'm in charge here, and I don't want you around. I want you to disappear from here and never come back. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am," David replied softly. "And if I see you around here again, I'll call Child Protective Services and say you're abandoned on the street." The threat hit David squarely. Since his grandfather left, he had been living with his Aunt Rosemary, Samuel's sister, in a small house in the same neighborhood. Rosemary worked as a cleaner in 3 different houses and barely had time to take care of herself, let alone keep up with the problems of a 12-year-old boy. If Child Protective Services really showed up, it could be a serious problem. "I understand, Mrs. Martha," he murmured. "I won't come back." David picked up his yellow toolbox and walked away. But he didn't go home. Instead, he walked to the neighborhood square, 2 blocks from the shop, and sat on a bench under a leafy tree. From there, he could still hear the sounds coming from Miller's Auto Care. The square was almost empty at that hour. Just a few retirees playing dominoes at a concrete table, and 2 children playing on the rusty slide. David opened the toolbox and began organizing the pieces, one by one. The tools had belonged to Samuel. Screwdrivers of various sizes, Phillips head screwdrivers, pliers, combination wrenches, a rubber mallet, an old multimeter, an amateur clamp. Each piece had a story, a memory. "David, a tool is an extension of a mechanic's hand," Samuel used to teach. "You have to know each one as if it were part of your body. Know which one to use in each situation without even thinking." The boy held a number 12 combination wrench, his grandfather's favorite for engine work. The tool was worn from use, but still worked perfectly. Samuel always said a good tool never retired, it just passed from generation to generation. The tears came without warning. David had held back the emotion all morning, endured Mrs. Martha's humiliations, maintained his dignity even while being treated as a nuisance. But alone in the square, handling his grandfather's tools, all the pain came to the surface. He had no one else in the world. Aunt Rosemary was a good person, but she was always tired, always chasing rent money and bills. There was no time to talk about the boy's dreams, about his future, about the passion he felt for mechanics. At school, David was an average student. He had no difficulties, but he didn't stand out either. The teachers saw him as just another quiet, polite boy. His classmates didn't bother him, but they weren't close friends either. His social life revolved around the garages, the cars, the world of mechanics that Samuel had introduced him to. And now even that had been taken from him. Mrs. Martha had made it clear he wasn't welcome at the garage. Probably other garages in the neighborhood would have the same reaction. Who would take a 12-year-old boy wanting to work as a mechanic seriously? The sound of a poorly tuned engine interrupted his melancholy thoughts. David raised his head and saw a red Honda Fit passing slowly down the street bordering the square. The car made a characteristic metallic noise, and there was a slight bluish smoke coming from the exhaust. Instinctively, David analyzed the symptoms. Engine burning oil, probably worn piston rings. A serious problem that would require an engine overhaul. Expensive to fix, but not impossible. The Honda Fit stopped in front of the garage. David saw when an elderly woman got out of the car and went to speak with Mrs. Martha. Even from a distance, he could perceive the woman's distress from her nervous gestures and the way she pointed at the vehicle. Curiosity was stronger than prudence. David put the tools back in the box, got up from the bench and discreetly walked to a spot where he could hear the conversation. "Please, Mrs. Martha," the elderly woman pleaded, "I really need you to fix my car. It's the only way I have to get to the hospital for my treatments." "Mrs. Catherine, you know we always take care of you. What's the problem?" It started yesterday. The car made some strange noises on the way back from the hospital. Then it started letting out a little smoke. This morning, it got much worse. Joe approached the Honda Fit and started the engine. The metallic noise became very evident, as did the blue smoke coming from the exhaust. Complicated? Joe shook his head. Seems like it's burning oil. Is that serious? Mrs. Catherine asked, worried. Could be. I need to investigate further to give a proper diagnosis. And how long will that take? To investigate, about 2 hours. For the repair, if it's what I think it is, it'll take about 3-4 days. 3 days? The elderly woman despaired. But I have an appointment tomorrow morning. And on Thursday. I can't be without a car. Mrs. Martha approached with a concerned look. Mrs. Catherine, we understand your situation, but if the problem is really serious, there's no way around it. It will take time to fix it properly. But what if it's not that serious? Mrs. Catherine insisted. Let's hope not, Joe replied, but his tone didn't sound very hopeful. David watched the whole scene, feeling a tightness in his chest. Mrs. Catherine had lived in the neighborhood for decades and was known to everyone as a kind and helpful person. Samuel always spoke of her fondly, saying she was one of the few customers who truly trusted his work. When Samuel was still alive, Mrs. Catherine would take her Honda Fit in for a checkup every 6 months. The old mechanic cared for the car as if it were his own, always preventing problems before they appeared. Ever since Samuel passed, Mrs. Catherine had avoided taking the car in for maintenance, probably out of fear of being cheated or receiving poor service. The result was this. A problem that could have been prevented with routine maintenance had now turned into an emergency. David knew exactly what was happening with the Honda Fit. The metallic noise, the blue smoke, the history of neglected maintenance. The piston rings were indeed worn, but there was probably also a problem with the valves, a complex repair that would require a complete cylinder head teardown, but there was a possibility for a temporary fix. Samuel had taught him an old trick, used by experienced mechanics in emergency situations. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it could keep the car running for a few more months until Mrs. Catherine could save up for the full repair. The problem was that Martha had strictly forbidden his presence at the shop, and it wasn't just a matter of stubbornness. The threat from Child Protective Services was real and frightening. David kept watching as Joe began to examine the Honda Fit's engine. The veteran mechanic was competent, but he was following the normal diagnostic protocol. It would take him hours to get to where David had already gotten in minutes. The afternoon wore on, and David remained in the square, torn between the desire to help Mrs. Catherine and the fear of the consequences. Around 5 o'clock, he saw her return to the shop to hear the diagnosis. So, Joe, Martha asked. Confirmed, boss. Worn piston rings, valve problems, it's going to need an engine rebuild. How much will that cost? Mrs. Catherine asked with a trembling voice. Joe and Martha exchanged uncomfortable looks. Mrs. Catherine, Martha began delicately, it's an expensive repair. Between parts and labor, about $2,500. The elderly woman paled. $2,500? My God, I don't have that kind of money. You can pay in installments, Martha suggested. We can give you a good price if you pay cash, or you can pay in 10 installments on a card. I don't have a credit card, and even with installments I can't. My pension is a minimum wage. The silence that followed was heavy. Mrs. Catherine leaned on the car, visibly shaken. Joe lowered his head, embarrassed. Martha also seemed at a loss for words. And if we do nothing? Mrs. Catherine asked. Will the car stop working? It will get worse little by little, Joe explained. It might run for a few more weeks, but it will burn a lot of oil, make a lot of noise, lose power, and there's a risk of the engine seizing up completely. If it seizes, then it can't be fixed anymore. It could, but it would be even more expensive, about $4,000 or $5,000. Mrs. Catherine closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Joe, can you do something to make it last at least until the end of the month? I need to get to the hospital. I have no other way. Joe looked at Martha, who shook her head no. Mrs. Catherine, there's no quick fix for a burnt-out engine. You might be able to drive it for a few days, but it will be dangerous and will make the problem worse. So there's really no way? I'm sorry, Mrs. Catherine. There isn't. The elderly woman nodded sadly, took the car key and began to walk away. Mrs. Catherine, Martha called out, would you like us to call a relative for you? To come pick you up? No need, thank you. I'll walk. It's not that far. David saw when Mrs. Catherine started walking slowly along the sidewalk, carrying a heavy bag and limping slightly on her left leg. The scene broke his heart. He knew the lady's story. Samuel had told it many times. Mrs. Catherine had lost her husband 10 years before. Her children lived in other cities and rarely visited. She lived alone in a small house, survived on her pension, and needed to go to the hospital twice a week for diabetes and high blood pressure treatment. The red Honda Fit was her only independence, her only decent means of transportation. Without the car, she would be dependent on crowded, slow buses or on taxis, which were expensive. Her medical appointments would become an ordeal. Her quality of life would plummet drastically, and David knew how to solve the problem, at least temporarily. The trick Samuel had taught him involved a specific mixture of additives in the engine oil. It wasn't a permanent fix, but it created a temporary seal that reduced oil consumption and lessened the smoke. With this stopgap solution, the car could run for another 3 or 4 months, enough time for Mrs. Catherine to get her finances in order. But to do this, he would need access to the car and the proper tools, and Martha had made it very clear she didn't want him around. David picked up his yellow toolbox and followed Mrs. Catherine at a distance. When she arrived home, 3 blocks later, he approached discreetly. "Mrs. Catherine?" The elderly woman turned, surprised. "Hi, son. Aren't you Mr. Samuel's grandson?" "Yes, ma'am." "David." "Oh, yes. I remember you as a little one, always stuck to your grandfather. How are you, son?" "Fine, Mrs. Catherine. Listen, about your car." "Oh, son, what a situation. I don't know what I'm going to do." "Ma'am, can I take a look? Maybe I can do something." Mrs. Catherine hesitated. "Son, you're so young. It's a complicated problem. You trusted my grandfather, right?" "I trusted him with my life. Mr. Samuel was an angel. He taught me everything he knew. I might not be able to do the permanent repair, but maybe I can get the car running a little longer." Hope shone in Mrs. Catherine's eyes. "You think you can?" "I can try. No charge, of course." "Oh, son, that would be a blessing. But are you sure?" "Yes, I am. I just need you to let me work on the car." Mrs. Catherine opened her house gate, and David pushed the Honda Fit into the backyard. The house was simple but well kept, with a small garden full of colorful flowers. At the back of the yard, there was a covered area that would fit a car nicely. "Can I turn on the light here for you?" Mrs. Catherine offered. "Yes, ma'am. And if you have an extension cord, that would help a lot." While Mrs. Catherine arranged the lighting, David opened his toolbox and began mentally planning what he needed to do. First, drain the old oil. Then, apply the special additive Samuel had taught him to make. Finally, top it off with new oil and test it. The additive was a mixture of products that could be bought at any auto parts store. Liquid gasket sealer, viscosity improver, ring sealant. Samuel had developed the formula over decades of experience, testing proportions until he found the ideal combination. "Mrs. Catherine," David called, "could you lend me about $50? It's to buy the products I'll need." "Of course, son." She opened her purse immediately. "Here you go." "Thank you. I'll go to Mr. Arthur's store and be right back." The neighborhood auto parts store was 2 blocks away. Mr. Arthur had known David since he was a boy, always saw him accompanying Samuel on parts runs. "Hey, David, how are you, son?" "Good, Mr. Arthur. I need a few things here." David bought exactly what he needed: liquid sealant, viscosity improver, ring sealant, and 5 liters of 15W40 mineral oil. In total, it came to $42. Back at Mrs. Catherine's house, he began the work. First, he positioned a pan under the oil pan and removed the drain plug. The oil that came out was indeed very dark and contaminated, confirming the diagnosis of internal engine wear. While the oil drained, David prepared the additive mixture following exactly the formula Samuel had taught him. 2 parts liquid sealant, 1 part viscosity improver, half a part ring sealant, all mixed in a specific proportion for each liter of oil. "My son, are you sure about what you're doing?" Mrs. Catherine asked, worried. "Yes, ma'am. My grandfather taught me this recipe. It's not a permanent fix, but it will make the car run for a while longer." "How long?" About 3-4 months. Maybe even 6 if you take good care of it. Oh, that would be wonderful. It would give me time to save at least part of the money for the repair. After all the old oil had drained, David replaced the drain plug and began adding the new oil already mixed with the additives. It was a delicate process, requiring patience and precision. "Mrs. Catherine, can you start the car for me?" The engine still made noise, but David immediately noticed it had improved. The blue smoke had also decreased significantly. He let the engine run for 10 minutes, watching carefully for any change in its behavior. "It seems better," Mrs. Catherine exclaimed, hopeful. "Yes, it is better, ma'am. But remember, it's just a temporary fix. You'll need to do the full repair later on." "I know, my boy, but it's already given me a heck of a lot of hope." David turned off the engine and cleaned his tools. The work had taken 2 hours, but it was worth every minute. Seeing the relief on Mrs. Catherine's face was a better reward than any money. "How much do I owe you, my boy?" "Nothing, Mrs. Catherine. It's really free." "Free? You spent your time, used your tools. You trusted me when no one else would. That's priceless." The elderly woman hugged David with tears in her eyes. "God bless you, my boy. You're just like your grandfather. You have the same good heart." David put away his tools and said goodbye. It was almost 9 at night when he got home. Aunt Rosemary hadn't returned from work yet, so he heated up the meal she had left and ate alone. Before sleeping, David kept thinking about the day's events. The humiliating rejection at the shop, the meeting with Mrs. Catherine, the opportunity to finally put his grandfather's teachings into practice. As painful as the morning had been, the night ended with a feeling of purpose fulfilled. The next morning, David woke up early and got ready for school. He was leaving the house when he heard the familiar sound of the red Honda Fit passing by the street. Mrs. Catherine waved from the window with a radiant smile. The car was running much better. Almost no strange noise, no visible smoke. The temporary fix was working perfectly. During classes, David had trouble concentrating. He kept thinking about the shop, the cars that needed repair, the missed opportunities. Math and Portuguese seemed unimportant next to the passion he felt for mechanics. During recess, he sat alone under a tree in the schoolyard. Other boys were playing soccer, girls were chatting in groups, but David preferred the solitude to organize his thoughts. "David!" a female voice called him. It was Julie, a classmate who occasionally talked to him. "Hi, Julie. Can I sit here?" "Sure." Julie sat on the bench next to him. "Are you okay? You seem a bit down today." "I'm fine." "Fine? You barely said a word in class, and you look like you slept poorly." David sighed. Julie was one of the few people at school who showed genuine interest in her classmates. "It's complicated, Julie. Adult stuff. Tell me, sometimes it helps to talk." David hesitated, but ended up telling her everything. The attempt to get work at the shop, the humiliation he went through, the episode with Mrs. Catherine. Julie listened to it all in silence. "Wow, what a situation," she commented when he finished. "But you did the right thing helping Mrs. Catherine." "I did what my grandfather would do. And that shop owner, what a pain. Prejudiced too. She has her reasons. A mechanic shop really isn't a place for a kid." "But you're not just any kid," Julie observed. "You really know what you're doing. Trying to convince others of that is the problem." The bell rang, announcing the end of the break. The two got up to go back to the classroom. "David," Julie said before they went in, "don't give up, okay? One day they'll recognize your worth." In the afternoon, when he got back from school, David decided to swing by the shop just to observe. He stood across the street, hidden behind a newspaper stand, just watching the activity. Miller's Auto Care was quite busy. There were 5 cars waiting for service, and the 3 mechanics seemed overwhelmed. Martha was running back and forth, clearly stressed by the demand. One of the cars in line was a black Ford Fiesta that made a very strange noise when started. David immediately recognized the sound. Timing chain problem. A relatively simple fix, but one that required experience to avoid complications. Charlie was examining the Fiesta, but looked confused. He'd start the engine, turn it off, open the hood, fiddle with a few things, but couldn't reach any conclusion. "Charlie," Martha called, "how much longer to figure out the problem with this Fiesta?" "I don't know, boss." I've never heard a noise like it. What do you mean you've never heard it? You've been a mechanic for 5 years. This noise is different. It seems to come from inside the engine, but I can't pinpoint it. David shook his head, frustrated. The noise was clearly from the timing chain. Any experienced mechanic would identify it in seconds, but Charlie was more of an electrical specialist, not very experienced with engine mechanical problems. Joe approached the Fiesta to help Charlie. The two worked on the car for over an hour, took part of the engine apart, but couldn't reach the correct diagnosis. "Boss," Joe finally admitted, "this one is tough. I'm going to need more time to investigate." "More time?" "Joe, there are already 3 cars waiting." "I know, but this noise is tricky. I've never heard anything like it." The owner of the Fiesta, who had come back to check on the progress, grew impatient. "Look, if you don't know what it is, I'd rather take it to another shop." "No, sir." Martha became desperate. "We'll fix it for sure. It's just a matter of time." "How much time?" Joe and Martha exchanged uncertain looks. "By tomorrow morning," she ventured. "All right, but if it's not ready tomorrow, I'm taking it away." After the customer left, Martha called Joe for a private talk. "Joe, are you sure you can fix this Fiesta by tomorrow?" "Honestly, boss, I'm not. It's a noise I've never heard. It could be several things." "So what do we do?" "I could try calling Butch to take a look. He has more engine experience than I do." "Butch charges a lot to come here." "Yeah, but he might know what it is." Martha sighed, visibly worried. Butch was a veteran mechanic who consulted for shops when there were very complex problems, but he charged $200 just for the diagnosis. Across the street, David watched everything with growing frustration. The Fiesta's problem was simple. He could fix it in 2 hours. But he was forbidden from approaching the auto shop. Around 5 in the afternoon, he saw when Mrs. Catherine passed by with the Honda Fit running perfectly. The elderly woman waved to him with a grateful smile, and that warmed his heart. At least one person had benefited from his knowledge. That night, at home, David talked with Aunt Rosemary about the situation. "Aunt, do you think I'm too young to work?" Rosemary, who was preparing dinner, stopped and looked at her nephew. "Why do you ask that, my boy?" "I wanted to work at an auto shop, but the boss said I'm too small." "Oh, David, you know you have to study, right? Work comes later." "But I wanted to work part-time. Study in the morning, work in the afternoon." "And why this rush to work?" David hesitated. He didn't want to worry his aunt by talking about money, but he knew she was always tight financially. "I wanted to help with the household expenses." Rosemary approached and stroked her nephew's hair. "My boy, you are a blessing in my life, but you're still too young to worry about these things. Let me take care of everything." "But Aunt, I know how to work on cars. My grandfather taught me." "I know, my boy. Your grandfather always said you had a talent, but there's a time for everything. Now is the time to study." "What if I got a job that didn't interfere with my studies?" Rosemary looked him in the eyes, sensing there was something more behind the conversation. "David, did something happen? You can tell me." So David told her everything. The trip to the auto shop, Martha's rejection, the episode with Mrs. Catherine. Rosemary listened to it all in silence with a worried expression. "My boy, you can't just go around fixing other people's cars like that. What if something goes wrong? If you hurt someone?" "But Aunt, I know what I'm doing. I know you learned a lot from your grandfather, but you're still a minor. If something happens, I'm the one who answers for it." "So you won't let me work?" Rosemary sighed deeply. "David, I'll be honest with you. If it were just a matter of age, I might consider it. But working on cars is dangerous. And that woman at the shop has made it clear she doesn't want you there. But she doesn't want me just because she's prejudiced. Maybe, but forcing the issue won't work. It'll just end up creating problems for you and for me." David hung his head, discouraged. Even his aunt, who was the closest person he had in the world, didn't understand his passion for mechanics. "Listen, my boy," Rosemary continued, "how about we do this? You finish at least elementary school, and then we'll talk about work. It's only 2 more years." "2 years is a long time, Aunt. It'll pass quickly, and in the meantime, you can keep studying mechanics on your own. Read books, watch videos, things like that." It wasn't what David wanted to hear, but at least it wasn't a complete refusal. He reluctantly agreed. The next day at school, David could barely concentrate in class. He kept thinking about the Ford Fiesta with the timing chain problem, wondering if Joe had managed to fix it or if they'd had to call that Butch guy. At lunchtime, he decided to swing by the auto shop to see what was happening. He watched from a distance and saw the Ford Fiesta was still there, with the hood open and Joe working on it. But there was also an unfamiliar man examining the engine. By the looks of it, it was the Butch that Martha had called for a consultation. Butch was a man of about 50, greying hair, a prominent belly, but experienced hands that worked on the engine with confidence. He started the car, listened to the noise carefully, turned it off, adjusted some parts. 15 minutes later, David saw when Butch stepped away from the car and started talking to Martha. By his body language, it seemed he had identified the problem. "Timing chain," David murmured to himself, certain that was what the man was explaining. Shortly after, he saw when Butch left the shop. Mrs. Martha handed him some bills, confirming he had charged for the consultation. For the rest of the afternoon, Joe worked on the Ford Fiesta, disassembling the top of the engine to access the timing chain. It was exactly what David had predicted. Around 5 in the afternoon, the car was running perfectly. The customer returned, tested the vehicle, was satisfied, and paid for the repair. David observed everything with mixed feelings. On one hand, he was pleased to confirm his diagnosis was correct. On the other, he felt frustrated not to have been part of the solution. $200 spent unnecessarily on consultation, wasted time, a customer unhappy with the delay. All of that could have been avoided if Mrs. Martha had given him a chance. But the most important lesson David took from the situation was that technical knowledge alone wasn't enough. He also needed credibility, opportunity, someone who trusted his skills, and for that, perhaps a different plan was necessary. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot who are just starting out. Now continuing. In the days that followed, David developed a new strategy. Instead of trying to force his way into the shop, he decided to build his reputation gradually, helping people in the neighborhood with simple problems in their cars. He started with Mrs. Catherine, who was so satisfied with the result of the temporary fix that she began telling her friends about Mr. Samuel's grandson who had saved her car. The second opportunity came 3 days later. David was walking back from school when he saw Mr. Anthony, the owner of the corner grocery store, standing next to his white Toyota Yaris with the hood open. "Trouble, Mr. Anthony?" "Hi, David. Yeah, the car won't start, and I have deliveries to make now." David approached and observed the situation. Mr. Anthony turned the key, the engine struggled to start but died immediately, a classic fuel delivery problem. "Can I take a look?" "Of course, son. Do you know about these things?" "A little. I learned from my grandfather." David grabbed his toolbox, which he now always carried in his school backpack, and began to investigate. First, he checked if there was fuel in the tank. There was. Then, he tested the electric fuel pump. The problem was the fuel filter, which was clogged. A simple situation to fix, just needed to replace the part. "Mr. Anthony, do you have a fuel filter there in the store?" "I don't, son, but I can have someone get one from Mr. Arthur's store. If you want, I'll go get it. It's really close." 10 minutes later, David returned with the new filter. The replacement took only 15 minutes, and the Yaris was running perfectly again. "Wow, son, how did you figure that out so fast?" "The sound the engine made when starting, Mr. Anthony. It indicated a delivery problem." "And how much do I owe you?" "Nothing. Just the filter, which cost $15. "What do you mean, nothing? You spent your time, used your tools. Here's $50. "You don't have to, Mr. Anthony. It was no trouble." "Yes, I do, and look, any problem I have with the car, I'm calling you first." The news spread quickly through the neighborhood. In 1 week, David had helped 5 different people with problems in their cars, always charging only for the parts, never for labor. Mrs. Beatrice, a retiree who lived alone, spent 2 hours trying to start her Chevy Sonic on a rainy morning. David discovered it just needed new spark plugs, which were worn out. $20 in parts, problem solved. Mr. Frank from the bakery had the transmission on his van sticking. David adjusted the throttle cable that was out of adjustment. It didn't cost anything, just time and knowledge. Mrs. Gladys's daughter was desperate because her car was making a horrible noise when braking. David saw that the brake pads were at their limit and advised her to replace them immediately. He didn't do the work himself because it was dangerous, but he recommended a trustworthy shop. Every small job he did, every problem he solved, every person he helped was building his reputation in the neighborhood. People began to recognize him as the boy who knows about cars, Mr. Samuel's grandson who inherited his grandfather's talent. But the most important thing was that David was learning things no book or video could teach: how to deal with customers, how to explain technical problems in simple terms, how to be honest about limitations. 2 weeks after the episode at Martha's shop, David was at home studying when he heard a knock at the door. It was Mrs. Fay, who lived 3 houses down. "Hi, David. Sorry to bother you, but my car has a problem and I don't know what to do." "What kind of problem, Mrs. Fay?" "It starts fine, but when I go to drive it makes these strange jerks. And there's a red light flashing on the dashboard I've never seen." David went to Mrs. Fay's house to examine her silver Versa. He started the car, tested the accelerator, observed the dashboard. The flashing light was for the electronic fuel injection system. When he tried to move the car, there were indeed irregular jerks, as if the engine was misfiring. David immediately suspected a problem with the throttle position sensor, a delicate part of the injection system. "Mrs. Fay, this problem needs special equipment to diagnose. I don't have it." "Oh, what a shame. What do I do now?" "You need to take it to a shop that has a scanner. It's a device that reads the error codes from the car's computer." "Is that expensive?" "The diagnosis costs about $50. The repair will depend on what it is." "Wow, $50 just to find out the problem?" David became thoughtful. He knew what the problem likely was, but he had no way to confirm it without the proper equipment. Giving a wrong diagnosis could be worse than giving none at all. "Listen, Mrs. Fay, I have a suspicion of what it might be, but I can't confirm it without the tool. Would you like me to go with you to the shop? I can help explain the symptoms to the mechanic." "You would do that?" "Of course. Tomorrow morning I can go with you." The next day, David accompanied Mrs. Fay to a shop specializing in electronic fuel injection in the center of the neighborhood. The mechanic connected the scanner to the car and 5 minutes later confirmed the diagnosis: faulty throttle position sensor. "How much to replace it?" Mrs. Fay asked. "The part costs $120 plus $60 for labor, total $180. "And does it really need to be replaced?" "It does, ma'am. Without this sensor working, the car will keep misfiring and might even stop running." Mrs. Fay authorized the repair. While they waited, she talked with David. "How did you know it was this sensor, dear?" "The symptoms, Mrs. Fay. When the car misfires only when accelerating but starts fine, it's usually a problem with the injection system, and the flashing light confirmed it." "My, how smart you are, just like your grandfather." An hour later, the car was ready. The mechanic made sure to test it in their presence, and indeed the problem was solved. "Mrs. Fay," the mechanic commented, "the boy who came with you knows his stuff. His diagnosis was spot on." "Yes, he's very clever. Mr. Samuel's grandson, who worked at the shop in Hope Valley." "Oh, I knew Mr. Samuel, great mechanic. He died last year, right?" "That's right." And it seems the talent passed on to the grandson. On the way home, Mrs. Fay insisted on giving David $50 for his help, but he politely refused. He was already satisfied with having helped and learned something new about electronic diagnostics. But the episode had an unforeseen consequence. The mechanic at the specialized shop, impressed with David's knowledge, asked for his phone number. "Look, kid," he said on the way out, "if you want to learn about electronic fuel injection, you can come by here on weekends. There's always work and you can just observe." It was an incredible opportunity. David thanked him profusely and promised to come by the following Saturday. When he got home, he told Aunt Rosemary everything. "That's great, my boy. At least this way you can learn without causing trouble for anyone." "Auntie, can I go there on Saturday?" "Yes, you can, but just to observe, okay? Don't touch anything dangerous." "I promise, Auntie." On Saturday morning, David got ready early and went to the electronic fuel injection shop. The owner, named Simon, welcomed him warmly, and introduced him to the other employees. "Everyone, this is David, Mr. Samuel's grandson. He's going to stay here observing, learning how the electronic systems work." David spent the entire day watching diagnostics, learning how to use the scanner, understanding how the sensors and actuators in modern cars worked. It was a new world, completely different from the traditional mechanics he had learned from his grandfather. "David," Simon said at the end of the day, "you have a very good foundation. You understand explanations quickly. If you want, you can come every Saturday." "Really? Really? And look, if you're really interested in this area, when you turn 18, I can hire you as an official apprentice." It was the first concrete job offer David had ever received. He still had 6 years to go before turning 18, but at least it was a real prospect for the future. Over the following weeks, David established a routine: school in the morning, helping people in the neighborhood with simple problems in the afternoon, studying electronic fuel injection on Saturdays at Simon's shop. His reputation in the neighborhood continued to grow. People started seeking him out before even trying other solutions. Mrs. Catherine recommended him to her friends. Mr. Anthony talked about the mechanical prodigy boy at the grocery store. But it was on a Thursday afternoon that everything changed definitively. David was coming home from school when he saw a commotion in front of Miller's Auto Care. There was a crowd of people on the sidewalk, cars stopped in the street, everyone looking at the shop. He approached and discovered there had been an accident. An elderly customer, trying to leave with her car from the shop, had stepped on the accelerator instead of the brake and crashed into the wall of the building next door. The lady was fine, just shaken, but the car had significantly crumpled the front end. And worse, in the confusion of the accident, 2 other cars that were parked at the shop had also been hit. Martha was visibly desperate. 3 damaged cars, angry customers, the possibility of negligence lawsuits. The situation was chaotic. "How did this happen?" one of the customers shouted. "My car was parked and now it's all dented." "It was an accident, sir," Martha tried to explain. "Mrs. Vivian accidentally stepped on the accelerator." "Accident or negligence, where's the safety in this shop?" Joe, Charlie and Oscar were running back and forth, trying to assess the damage, calm the customers, organize the mess. But the situation was out of control. It was then that David noticed something no one else had. One of the hit cars, a grey Civic, was leaking fluid on the ground. But it wasn't engine oil, it was brake fluid. The impact had damaged the vehicle's brake lines. If anyone tried to drive that car, the brakes wouldn't work. It could cause a serious accident. David approached the Civic and examined underneath the car. A considerable puddle of brake fluid was forming. The line running from the master cylinder to the rear wheels had been ruptured in the impact. "Excuse me," he said to the Civic's owner, "you can't drive this car." "What do you mean?" The man became irritated. "Who are you?" "The brake system was damaged in the accident. If you try to drive, you might not be able to stop." The car's owner looked down and saw the puddle of fluid. "My God, is this serious?" "It's dangerous, sir, but it can be fixed. You just can't drive it until it's repaired." Martha approached, having heard the conversation. "Boy, what are you doing here? Didn't I already tell you not to show up anymore?" "Sorry, Mrs. Martha, but you can't take this car like this. It's dangerous." "And since when do you know about brakes?" The Civic's owner intervened. "Hold on a second. If the boy is saying it's dangerous, we better listen. Look at how much fluid has leaked." Joe bent down to examine the problem David had identified. "The boy is right, boss. The brake line is ruptured. You really can't drive it like this." Martha grew even more nervous. Now she had a serious technical problem to solve, on top of all the confusion from the accident. "All right, Joe. Can you fix this today?" "Not today, boss. I'll have to order the new line. It won't arrive until tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" the customer despaired. "But I need the car today. I have appointments." "Sir, there's no way. Without brakes, you can't drive." The confusion was escalating. The other customers were also getting impatient, wanting their car situations resolved quickly. Martha no longer knew what to do. It was then that David remembered something Samuel had taught him about emergency brake line repairs. "Mrs. Martha," he said timidly, "can I suggest something?" "Not now, boy. Can't you see we're busy?" "It's about the Civic's brakes. There's a way to do a temporary repair." The car's owner immediately became interested. What kind of repair? A patch on the line. It's not permanent, but it'll let you use the car until you get the new part. Martha looked at him with suspicion. A patch? Isn't that a hack job? No, ma'am. It's an emergency procedure that old mechanics used. My grandfather taught me. And does it really work? The customer asked. Yes, it works, but you'd have to replace the line within a week tops. Joe approached, interested in the conversation. David, how do you do this repair? You have to make a splice with a clamp and a special sealant. You need specific material, but it works. Martha was torn between wounded pride and practical necessity. The customer was pushing for a solution. Other cars needed attention, and she didn't have the time or the personnel to solve everything. All right, she sighed. You can explain how to do this repair to Joe. Actually, David said bravely, it would be better if I did it myself. It's a delicate procedure. You? Martha almost shouted. Work on a car's brakes? Are you crazy? Mrs. Martha, brakes are far too serious, Joe agreed. If something goes wrong, it could kill someone. The Civic's owner, who had followed the whole discussion, made a decision. Look, you all are arguing, but I need a solution. If the boy knows how to do this repair, let him try. I'll take responsibility. Sir, you can't take responsibility for this, Martha protested. Yes, I can. It's my car. It's my life. And from what I've seen, the boy knows what he's talking about. David felt the weight of the responsibility. Working on a brake system was indeed serious business. Any mistake could cause a serious accident. But he had confidence in the technique Samuel had taught him. All right, he agreed, but I'll need to buy the material at the auto parts store. How much does it cost? The customer asked. About $30. Go ahead and buy it. I'll pay. David went to Mr. Arthur's store and bought a metal clamp, special hydraulic system sealant and brake fluid. He returned to the shop carrying everything in a bag. A small crowd had gathered to watch. Shop customers, curious neighbors. Everyone wanted to see if the boy wonder could really fix the problem. David crouched under the Civic with his tools. He located exactly the point where the line had ruptured. It was a tear about 2 centimeters long in the steel tube. First, he carefully cleaned the entire area around the tear, removing oil, dirt, and dried brake fluid. Then he applied the sealant over the tear, completely covering the damage. Next, he positioned the metal clamp over the sealant and tightened it gradually, creating even pressure over the entire repair. It was delicate work, requiring precision and patience. Done, David said, coming out from under the car. Now we need to wait 20 minutes for the sealant to dry completely. While they waited, David took the opportunity to examine the other cars damaged in the accident. The problems were mainly dented bodywork, nothing that compromised safety or operation. 20 minutes later, he completed the second part of the repair. He added new brake fluid to the reservoir and bled the air from the system. It was an operation that required 2 people, one at the brake pedal and another bleeding the wheels. Joe offered to help, impressed with the technique he was seeing. Kid, where did you learn that? From my grandfather. He said a mechanic has to know how to solve problems even when you don't have the right part. Your grandfather really was a whiz. After fully bleeding the system, David tested the brake pedal. It was firm with no visible leaks. The repair had worked. All set, sir, he said to the Civic's owner. You can test it now. The man got in the car and tested the brakes several times, first with the car stopped, then driving slowly around the shop's yard. The system was working perfectly. Incredible, he exclaimed. It works just like before. Remember, sir, David warned, it's only a temporary repair. You have to replace the new line within a week. I will replace it, but at least I can use the car until then. How much do I owe you? Just for the material, sir, $30. What do you mean, just the material? You spent 2 hours working. The Civic's owner insisted on paying $100 for the service, despite David's protests. It was more money than the boy had earned all month helping people in the neighborhood. But the most important thing wasn't the money. It was the way people were looking at him now. Shop customers, mechanics, onlookers, all with a mix of surprise and respect. Son, said an elderly man who had watched everything. How old are you? 12, sir. 12 years old and you know how to do that? Amazing. Mr. Samuel's son? Asked another. Grandson. Ah, that explains it. The talent runs in the family. Martha watched everything in silence, visibly conflicted. On one hand, she was impressed by the technical competence she had just witnessed. On the other, she still resisted the idea of admitting she had misjudged David. When the commotion finally died down and the customers left, she approached him. Boy, David, thank you for the help. It was the first time she had addressed him by his name instead of kid or boy. You're welcome, Mrs. Martha. Listen, maybe I was too hard on you the other time. David waited in silence, not wanting to interrupt what seemed to be an important change in attitude. It's hard running a shop as a woman. Everyone doubts us all the time. When you showed up here, I thought you were just another person doubting my ability. I never doubted you, Mrs. Martha. I just wanted a chance to show I know how to work. I know that now. What you did today, that was the work of an experienced mechanic. Joe approached the conversation. Boss, the kid really knows what he's doing, and the folks around the neighborhood like him. It's true, Oscar agreed. My neighbor mentioned he helped her with her daughter's car. And Mrs. Catherine won't stop praising him, Charlie added. Martha was thoughtful for a few seconds. David, do you still want to work here? The boy's heart raced. Yes, I do, Mrs. Martha. But there are conditions. You can only work after school. You have to keep your grades up, and you can't handle dangerous jobs without supervision. I accept everything. And the pay will be low, half the minimum wage, because you're a minor. That's great, Mrs. Martha. Then it's settled. You can start tomorrow afternoon. David could hardly believe what he was hearing. After so much humiliation and rejection, he had finally earned a real opportunity. Thank you, Mrs. Martha. You won't regret it. I hope not. She smiled for the first time since they'd met. That night, at home, David told Aunt Rosemary everything. My boy, what joy. But are you sure you can handle studying and working? Yes, Aunt. I'll only work in the afternoons after school. And this woman, will she treat you well now? I think so. She realized, I really know how to work. That's good, my boy. Your grandfather would be proud. The next day, David could barely concentrate in class, anxious to start his first official day of work. When the bell rang, he ran straight from school to the shop. I'm here, Mrs. Martha. Hi, David. Welcome to the team. She handed him a blue jumpsuit with the shop's name embroidered on the pocket. It's your uniform. Take good care of it. David put the jumpsuit on over his school clothes. It was too big for him, but it was the most beautiful uniform he had ever worn. What do I do first? First, you're going to watch Joe working, learn the shop's procedures, how we organize the work. Okay. And David, thank you again for your help yesterday. You saved my shop from a very complicated situation. You don't need to thank me. Now we're a team. Martha smiled. For the first time since she had bought the shop, she felt she had made a truly right decision. David's first days at Miller's Auto Care were about adaptation. He observed, learned the procedures, got to know each of the mechanics better. Joe became his mentor, teaching him not only techniques, but also how to deal with customers and suppliers. David, Joe explained, working on cars is only half the job. The other half is dealing with people. Upset customers, late suppliers, a stressed boss. You have to know how to navigate all that. How did you learn these things? With time, my boy, and by making a lot of mistakes. Your grandfather was good at it. He knew how to talk to anyone. Gradually, David took on greater responsibilities. He started with simple diagnostics, then small repairs, until he got to the more complex jobs. His presence in the shop brought surprising changes. The old customers who had known Samuel started frequenting the place again. Words like tradition and trust became associated with Miller's Auto Care once more. Mrs. Martha, Mrs. Catherine commented one afternoon, it's so good you hired David. It reminds me of the old days when your Samuel was here. It sure is, Mrs. Catherine. The boy really has his grandfather's way about him. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. David still faced challenges related to his age. Some customers were skeptical when they saw a kid working on their cars. Others were concerned about liability and safety issues. Mrs. Martha, complained a customer in the second week, I'm not comfortable with a child working on my car. Sir, David is supervised by Joe the entire time, and I guarantee he knows what he's doing. Even so, I'd prefer an adult. No problem. Joe can take over your service. Situations like this hurt David, but he learned not to take it personally. It was part of the process of building trust. My boy, Joe would console him, patience is a mechanic's virtue. Just as you need time to fix an engine, you need time to earn people's trust. 3 weeks after starting at the shop, David faced his biggest challenge yet. A Corolla with an electrical problem that none of the mechanics could solve. The car arrived on a Monday morning. The owner, a middle-aged businessman, explained that the vehicle had stopped working in the middle of traffic and wouldn't start anymore. Charlie, who was the electrical specialist, examined the car all morning. He tested the battery, alternator, starter motor, fuses. Everything seemed to be working normally, but the car simply showed no signs of life. "Boss," Charlie admitted at lunch, "this one's got me beat. I can't even figure out where the problem is." "What do you mean?" "You're our electrical specialist." "I know, but this car has a very modern system. It has a computer, sensors, a bunch of electronics I don't master." Martha was worried. The Corolla was an expensive car. The client was influential in the neighborhood. If they couldn't fix it, it would be terrible for the shop's reputation. "What if we call Butch again?" "I can try, but Butch is more of an engine guy. Electronics aren't his strong suit either." It was then that David remembered the classes he'd been attending on Saturdays at Simon's shop. Electronic systems, sensors, onboard computers. Maybe he could at least identify the direction of the problem. "Mrs. Martha, can I take a look?" "You?" "David, this is advanced electronics." "I know, but I've been learning some things about it in the Saturday classes." "What classes?" David explained his arrangement with Simon's shop, the lessons on electronic fuel injection, the diagnostic equipment he had learned to use. "Well," Martha sighed, "if Charlie couldn't do it, it doesn't hurt for you to try." David approached the Corolla and began his analysis. First, he tried to start the car. No reaction, not even the dashboard lit up. This indicated a problem with the main power supply, but Charlie had already tested the battery and fuses, so the problem had to be elsewhere. David remembered a lesson from Simon about modern security systems. Newer cars had security chips that could completely block operation if they detected an anomaly. "Charlie, did you test the key chip?" "Key chip?" "Yeah, some modern cars have a chip in the key that communicates with the computer. If there's a problem with that communication, the car won't start." "Oh, right. But how do you test that?" "You need a scanner. Do you have one?" "I have a basic one, but I don't know if it reads that kind of thing." David examined Charlie's scanner. It was an old model, suitable only for basic diagnostics. It wouldn't work for advanced security systems. "Mrs. Martha, can I call Simon? He has a more modern scanner. Maybe he can come here and take a look." "Will he charge a lot?" "I'll ask, but I think he gives me a special price." David called Simon and explained the situation. The man agreed to come to the shop in the late afternoon when he finished his own jobs. "I charge $100 just for the diagnosis," he said. "If it really is a chip problem, another $50 to reprogram it." It was half the price Butch would charge. Martha authorized it immediately. At 5 in the afternoon, Simon arrived at Miller's Auto Care with his professional scanner. David introduced him to Martha and the team. "So, David," Simon said, "let's see if your hunch is right." He connected the scanner to the Corolla and began running tests. 5 minutes later, the diagnosis was confirmed. "Faulty security chip," he announced. "The computer doesn't recognize the key as valid, so it blocks the whole system." "And can it be fixed?" Martha asked. "Yes. I need to reprogram the computer to accept a new key. 2 hours of work." "And can David watch? He's learning about electronics." "Of course. In fact, he was the one who gave the correct diagnosis. Congratulations, kid." For the next 2 hours, David watched the reprogramming work attentively. He learned about security codes, communication protocols between chips, synchronization procedures. "David," Simon explained as he worked, Automotive electronics is the future. Cars are becoming more and more computerized. Anyone who doesn't keep up with this evolution will be left behind. Is it hard to learn? At first it's complicated, but you have a good foundation. You pick up the explanations quickly. If you keep studying, you could become a specialist. When the Corolla finally started working again, the owner was impressed. How did you figure out the problem? It was David who gave the diagnosis, Martha replied with pride. He's been studying automotive electronics. The boy, really, he identified it was a problem with the security chip. Incredible. A boy of, how old are you, son? 12, sir. 12 years old and understands automotive electronics? Impressive. The customer paid for the repair, praising the team's work highly. He left saying he would recommend the shop to his friends. David, Martha said when they were alone, you saved our reputation again. I just did my job, Mrs. Martha. No, it was more than that. You brought new knowledge to our shop, knowledge we didn't have. It was true. The partnership with Simon was bringing unexpected benefits. David functioned as a bridge between the traditional mechanics of Miller's Auto Care and the modern technology of the specialized shop. In the months that followed, this synergy intensified. David continued learning on Saturdays with Simon and applied the knowledge during the week at Martha's shop. It was a virtuous cycle of learning and practical application. The reputation of Miller's Auto Care grew significantly. Old customers returned, new customers arrived by referral, and the shop began to be sought out for automotive electronic services as well. Mrs. Martha, Joe commented one afternoon, the shop has never been this busy, not since Mr. Samuel's time. That's right, Joe, and much of that is thanks to David. The boy really does have a special gift, and what impresses me most is his humility. I've never seen him boast or look down on anyone. It was true. Despite all the recognition he had been receiving, David kept his feet on the ground. He continued to treat everyone with respect, always willing to learn new things. You know, Joe, Martha reflected, when David first showed up here, I only saw his age. I didn't see the knowledge, I didn't see the potential, it was pure prejudice. We sometimes make those mistakes, boss. The important thing is to recognize and correct them. Yes, and I almost missed the chance to have the best young mechanic in the region on my team. At the end of David's first year at the shop, Martha held a meeting with the whole team to evaluate the results. Everyone, she began, you know this was the best year in our shop's history. We increased our number of customers by 40%. Revenue grew even more. And all of this while maintaining the quality of service. Joe, Charlie, and Oscar applauded. David remained quiet, modest as always. And I want to acknowledge that much of this success is due to our newest team member. David, you brought not only technical knowledge but also an attitude that inspired all of us to be better. Thank you, Mrs. Martha. But it was a team effort. It was. But you were the catalyst, and for that, I'm promoting you to junior mechanic with full salary. Really? Really. You deserve it. The other mechanics applauded sincerely. There was no envy or resentment, only genuine recognition of David's talent. That night, at home, David told the news to Aunt Rosemary. I'm so proud, my boy, your grandfather would be very happy. Aunt, now I can really help with the household expenses. You already help so much, my boy, not just with money, but by being this wonderful person you are. Aunt, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think my grandfather would really be proud? Rosemary hugged her nephew affectionately. My boy, your grandfather wouldn't just be proud, he would be beaming. You've honored his memory in the best way possible, by being competent, honest, and humble. Sometimes I feel like he's with me, guiding me. And he is, my boy. What we learn from special people never dies. It stays forever in our hearts. 2 years later, when David turned 14, Miller's Auto Care had become a benchmark in the region. The shop serviced not only popular cars, but also imported vehicles and advanced electronic systems. David had become the specialist in complex diagnostics. His fame had spread beyond the neighborhood, and customers came from other areas specifically for him to examine their cars. David, Martha said one morning, I need to talk to you about your future. What kind of talk, Mrs. Martha? You're growing, developing very fast. Soon you'll need new challenges. How so? I'm thinking of opening a branch of the shop specializing in automotive electronics, and I wanted you to be the technical lead. David was surprised. It was an incredible but also frightening proposal. Mrs. Martha, I'm still very young. David, age is just a number. Competence is what matters, and you've proven your competence 1,000 times over. And school? You can keep studying. The branch would only operate in the afternoons, just like you already do here. It was a unique opportunity. At 14, David would be responsible for his own specialized shop. Can I think about it a little? Of course. You don't have to decide now. That night, David talked at length with his aunt about the proposal. It was tempting, but it also meant more responsibility and pressure. Aunt, do you think I'm ready? My boy, one is never completely ready, but you have the knowledge, you have the experience, and most importantly, you have character. The rest you learn along the way. And what if it fails? And what if it succeeds? Are you going to spend your whole life wondering what if? Rosemary was right. Samuel always said that opportunities appeared few times in life, and you needed to have the courage to seize them. The next day, David communicated his decision to Martha. I accept, Mrs. Martha, but on one condition. What is it? I want the shop to be named Samuel's Mechanics, in honor of my grandfather. Martha smiled, moved. Perfect, David. I think there couldn't be a better tribute. 6 months later, Samuel's Mechanics opened its doors. It was a small but modern shop, equipped with the best scanners and electronic diagnostic equipment. David, now 15, supervised a team of 2 adult specialized mechanics. It was an unusual situation, but one that worked perfectly thanks to mutual respect and the recognition of technical competence. The opening was a landmark event in the neighborhood. All the old customers, suppliers, neighbors, and schoolmates attended. Even the mayor of the city made a point of showing up. Everyone, David said in a short speech, this shop is dedicated to the memory of my grandfather, Samuel Miller. He taught me that mechanics isn't just a technique, it's a calling. It's the pleasure of solving problems, of helping people, of making things work right. Mrs. Catherine, now 78 years old, was in the front row, proud as if David were her own grandson. I promise, David continued, that we will uphold the values my grandfather taught me: honesty, competence, and respect for customers. The applause was warm and prolonged. It was the recognition of an entire community for a young man who had overcome prejudice and proven his worth through hard work. Martha approached him after the speech. David, do you remember the first time you showed up at my shop? Yes, I remember. You treated me very poorly. And I regret that to this day. It was the biggest foolish thing I've ever done. Mrs. Martha, you gave me the opportunity I needed, and you taught me important lessons about perseverance. You taught me important lessons about not judging people by their appearance. They hugged, sealing a partnership that had turned into a true friendship. 5 years after the opening of Samuel's Mechanics, David had become a national reference in automotive electronics. At 20 years old, he was sought after by automakers for consultations, gave lectures at universities, and had written 2 books on electronic diagnostics. But he never forgot his roots. Every Thursday, he set aside a few hours to provide free service to neighborhood residents who couldn't afford to pay. David, Mrs. Catherine, now 83 years old, said on one of those Thursdays, "You've become a wonderful man. Your grandfather would be very proud." Thank you, Mrs. Catherine. You've always been special to me. You were one of the first people to believe in my work. And you've never let me down, my boy. David looked around his shop. Modern, well-equipped, respected. But what made him proudest wasn't the equipment or the professional recognition. It was knowing he had honored his grandfather's memory and proven that competence has no age, color, or social origin. "Grandpa," he murmured to himself, "we did it." And deep in his heart, David knew that Samuel was smiling, proud of the grandson who had turned prejudice into opportunity, humiliation into motivation, and dreams into reality. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, David's professional success brought significant changes for his whole family. Aunt Rosemary was able to leave her cleaning jobs and started managing the shop's administration. The house where they lived was renovated, and they were able to provide better living conditions for themselves. But this growth wasn't all roses. With recognition also came pressure from large corporate groups interested in acquiring David's shops. Million-dollar offers arrived monthly, trying to convince him to sell the business. "David," Martha said in a meeting, "these offers are very tempting. You could become rich overnight." "Mrs. Martha, money isn't everything. These shops represent much more than profit. They are my grandfather's legacy, the dream we built together. But think of the opportunities that money could open up. The opportunities I need, I can create myself. I prefer to build something lasting rather than make easy money." It was a mature decision for someone 20 years old. David had learned early on that true achievements come from persistent effort, not shortcuts. During this period, he also started a social project that would become his greatest personal achievement: a free basic mechanics course for young people in socially vulnerable situations. "Aunt Rosemary," he explained the project, "I want to offer other boys the opportunity I almost didn't have, to teach mechanics to those who can't afford to pay." "What a beautiful idea, my son. How will it work?" "On Saturdays at Samuel's Mechanics, classes of 10 students, a 6-month course. Everything free, including tools and materials." The Future Wrenches project was launched with great impact in the community. Young people from 12 to 18 years old signed up en masse, many coming from distant neighborhoods. The first student to arrive for the inaugural class was a 13-year-old black boy carrying an old backpack and eyes full of hope. "What's your name?" David asked. "Jaden, sir." "Jaden, welcome. How old are you?" 13, sir." "And why do you want to learn mechanics?" "My father works as a mechanic, sir, but he says he has no education, only knows how to work on old cars. I want to learn the new technology so I can help him." The answer moved David deeply. Here was another boy with dreams similar to the ones he had years before, but now with a real opportunity for development. "Jaden, I can guarantee you one thing. If you dedicate yourself, you'll learn much more than technology. You'll learn a profession that can change your life." During the 6 months of the first course, David closely followed the development of each student. Jaden stood out for his determination and ease of learning, very much reminding David of himself at the same age. "Mr. David," Jaden asked in one of the classes, "do you think I can work in a shop even though I'm young?" "Jaden, age doesn't determine competence. If you prove you know how to do the work, someone will give you an opportunity. But what if they don't? Then you persist, show your value through small jobs, build your reputation. That's how I did it." "Did you face prejudice too?" "A lot, but I learned that prejudice is the problem of the one who has it, not the one who suffers from it. Our duty is to be so good at what we do that prejudice becomes irrelevant." By the end of the course, all 10 students from the first class had secured internships or jobs at local shops. Jaden was hired by a shop specializing in imported cars, impressing the owners with his knowledge of automotive electronics. "Mr. David," he said on the last day of class, "thank you for giving me the chance no one else would. Jaden, you earned that chance through effort. I just offered the knowledge. I want to be like you when I grow up." "No, Jaden. I want you to be better than me, to surpass everything I've achieved." The project expanded rapidly. In 2 years, it was already running 4 classes simultaneously and had created a waiting list with over 200 interested young people. Former students returned as volunteer tutors, creating a virtuous cycle of shared knowledge. The project's national impact caught the attention of universities and government agencies. David was invited to replicate the methodology in other cities, but he insisted on keeping the management centralized to ensure quality. "Aunt," he commented in a family conversation, "sometimes I think this project is more important than the shops themselves." "Why, my son?" "Because it's multiplying opportunities. Every young person who graduates here can transform his life and his family's life. Your grandfather would be proud to see this. He always said knowledge was the only inheritance no one can steal from us. It was around this time that David received the most important invitation of his career. A German automaker wanted him to move to Germany to head the company's automotive electronics research center. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity," explained the automaker's representative. "A salary of 300,000 euros a year, a house, a car, health insurance, all paid for by the company. And my projects here in Brazil. You could license the methodology to the automaker. We would be interested in expanding it globally." It was tempting. International recognition, a very high salary, the chance to work with the world's most advanced technologies. But it also meant abandoning his roots, his community, the social project that had become his passion. "I need time to think," David replied. "Of course, but don't take too long. This is an opportunity that may not come again." That night, David walked alone through the streets of the neighborhood where he grew up. He passed by Mrs. Catherine's house, already dark because she went to bed early. He passed by Mr. Anthony's grocery store, closed at that hour. He stopped in front of the building that had housed the first Miller's Auto Care, now a clothing store. Every place held memories of his journey. Every corner told a story of overcoming. Every establishment represented an achievement. "Grandpa," he said aloud, looking at the starry sky, "what would you do in my place?" There was no audible answer, but David felt an inner peace that gave him the answer. Samuel had spent his entire life serving his community, building genuine relationships, prioritizing people above money. The next day, David called the German automaker's representative. "Thank you for the opportunity, but I'm going to stay here in Brazil." "Are you sure? That's a lot of money you're turning down." "I'm sure. My life is here, my projects are here, it's not about money." "I understand. If you change your mind, the offer remains open for another 6 months." "Thank you, but I won't change my mind." The decision brought immense relief. David realized he had made the right choice when he saw the happiness in Aunt Rosemary's eyes and in the eyes of the young people from the social project. "David," said Jaden, who at 16 was now a course monitor, "I heard you turned down that $1 million offer." "You heard right. So what?" "Why did you stay?" "Because I discovered that happiness isn't measured in euros, Jaden. It's measured in lives transformed, in dreams fulfilled, in communities strengthened." "You're crazy," Jaden laughed, "but it's the kind of crazy I admire." In the following years, David continued expanding his projects without losing focus on the local community. He created a full technical school, opened a microcredit line for former students who wanted to open their own repair shops, and established partnerships with universities to offer higher education courses in automotive engineering. By 25, he had become a national reference in vocational education and social entrepreneurship. He received awards, honors, honorary titles. But what made him most proud was seeing prosperous former students, transformed families, young people who had found purpose through mechanics. "You know, Aunt," he said in a conversation after receiving another award, "sometimes I think my grandfather planned all of this." "How so, my boy?" "He knew I would be rejected at first, that I would go through hardships, but he prepared me with knowledge and values to overcome all of it. Your grandfather was truly wise. He always said the greatest victories come from the greatest difficulties." And he was right. If Mrs. Martha had accepted me right away, maybe I would never have developed the determination necessary to get where I am. The prejudice you suffered ended up being your greatest school. Exactly. It taught me humility, perseverance, empathy, qualities that money can't buy. On his 30th birthday, David organized a big party at the neighborhood event center. Hundreds of people attended, former students, clients, suppliers, neighbors, authorities. But the guests of honor were Mrs. Catherine, now 88 years old, and Martha, who at 52 still ran the original Miller's Auto Care. "Everyone," David said in his speech, "turning 30 is an important milestone. But looking back, what makes me proudest isn't the awards or recognitions. It's knowing I managed to turn rejection into acceptance, prejudice into opportunity, dreams into reality." He paused, emotional. When I was 12 years old and showed up at a repair shop looking for work, a blonde lady told me I was too young, too small, too inexperienced. She wasn't completely wrong. I was all those things. Martha smiled, embarrassed but affectionately. But that same lady, after seeing my work, had the greatness to recognize her mistake and give me the opportunity that changed my life. Mrs. Martha, thank you for being tough on me first and generous afterward. It was exactly what I needed. Martha stood up and hugged him under the emotional applause of the audience. David, she said into the microphone, I'm the one who's thankful. For teaching me that competence has no age, that talent has no color, and that character is worth more than any diploma. The event ended with everyone singing Happy Birthday and celebrating not just David's birthday, but the transformation of an entire community through education and dignified work. That night, when everyone had already left, David stayed alone in the hall tidying up the last details. That's when he found an envelope someone had discreetly left on one of the tables. Inside the envelope was an old photo of Samuel working in a repair shop and a handwritten note. David, your grandfather asked me to give this to you when you turned 30. He said that at this age you would understand the true meaning of success. You have honored everything he believed about you. Congratulations. Mrs. Eleanor, former owner of Miller's Auto Care. David held the photo tenderly. Samuel was smiling in the picture, covered in grease, happy doing what he loved. That was exactly how David felt now. Grandpa, he whispered, I managed to understand. Success isn't having money or fame. It's being useful. It's transforming lives. It's leaving the world a little better than we found it. And in that moment, under the soft light of the empty hall, David Miller Sullivan knew he had completely fulfilled Samuel Miller's legacy. He had transformed rejection into triumph, prejudice into opportunity, and dreams into a reality that benefited hundreds of people. The story of the boy who was ridiculed for his age and color, but who earned respect through competence and honest work, became a legend in the neighborhood and an example for future generations of young people who don't let themselves be defeated by life's initial difficulties. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this incredible story of overcoming. David managed to turn prejudice into opportunity and proved that talent has no age. Do you know someone who went through a similar situation? Leave your comment with your opinion, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this one.